So, we are going to continue talking about land and water use. Could someone please read the first statement and then call on someone else?
Describe alternatives to conventional farming methods. Popcorn. Sorry.
Describe human explain alternative techniques used in farming animals and in fishing or aquaculture.
Describe human nutritional needs. Marty.
Explain why nutritional requirements are not being met in various parts of the world.
Awesome. So these two we're going to actually push to Monday. So we will just be looking at the first two, looking at farming and a little bit of use of ocean and how that impacts our planet. And then Monday we'll talk about human nutritional needs and then global needs as well. And also have some like use of water in California specifically, so that you can have a location-based day where it gives you more context into how we manage or how our government manages water. All right. So first things first, we're going to talk a little bit about genetic engineering. So it has revolutionized agriculture because it has led to greater yield, greater food quality, reductions in pesticide use, reduction of world hunger by increased food production, and it has increased profits. However, some of these chemicals might not be fully safe for human consumption. Right? So when genetically modified organisms are created, oftentimes it's through the use of chemicals. Most of the produce in our grocery stores have been selected for or artificially selected for a certain taste, a certain look, right, a certain nutritional value. So that does play a part. But genetic engineering is like physically changing attributes of the plant. The other thing is that there's a negative effect on biodiversity. Why might this be the case? Why would genetically engineering or genetically modifying produce or organisms negatively affect biodiversity?
Because you have a control. It's not like natural.
Okay, so it's not natural.
It can't develop on its own or like produce something different or like evolve.
Can't evolve. Yeah. What else then?
Like they have like a formula to make.
Can you speak a little louder?
Like because they have a set way of making it, so all of them want things.
So way of making it, yeah. The other thing is that there's only like one type, right? There's not necessarily going to be multiple types of the same one anymore. So right now we have lots and lots and lots of types of tomatoes, but say like this one ends up getting overproduced or ends up not being a good thing anymore, then you're going to get an extinction of a type of produce. So that can happen with a lot of different organisms, a lot of different produce. And then there's also the part of regulating these companies that are modifying organisms or are genetically modifying produce. And so those three things, for me, has a bigger weight than say this for our increased profits.
Thank you.
So when we're looking at farming meat and fish, there is something called a concentrated animal feeding operation, otherwise known as CAFO. CAFO, to say it both ways. Now, these three are showing you that there are confined spaces. Generally, antibiotics are also used on organisms because they are in such close proximity. Diseases can pass very quickly from one organism to another. There's also the issue of waste disposal. So when you have that many cows aligned right there, you're going to have a lot of waste, in a very small location. Now, fishery, there is a couple things. One is something called the tragedy of the commons. And that can be defined as a problem in economics that occurs when individuals neglect the well-being of society in pursuit of personal gain. So I don't really like that it's saying tragedy of the commons because that doesn't fit. It's not like the commons chose to do that. But a lot of the companies, right, are for-profit, have jeopardized our environment for their own profit. Right. The other thing is that there are fishery collapses, which is a decline by 90% or more of the fish, which means that there's only 10% left when a fishery collapses, which, when there's no more fish, or very few fish, right, prices will rise. It's really hard to recover from that, and the economy will actually suffer. There's also something called a bycatch, and that is unintentional catching of species of fish outside of the target fish. And so when nets are used, like these nets here, you get a lot of fish, but you also get fish that aren't supposed to be there. And we'll talk about some modifications to nets that actually allows for a minimization of the bycatch. So, when we're looking at a comparison between the type of agricultural practices that we talked about yesterday, like monocropping, and these, right, we have something called intercropping. And you can see in these pictures that it actually is one type of plant, another type of plant, the first plant, second plant, first plant, second plant. And what that actually does, it allows for the soil to actually be more stabilized, to be more solid, to actually support more growth. Because plants generally have different lengths of roots. The other thing is that you can actually strategically pair these and have them be able to replenish nutrients in the soil, which is really great because that means that you don't have to use as much fertilizer. Another thing that you can do is something called crop rotation. And so this is showing you a 4-year crop rotation. So the first one is malt and barley, second year is spring wheat, third year is potato, year 4 is malt and barley, and then it keeps on cycling. And so what ends up happening is that these plants all help each other because in some plants use different nutrients, right? But other plants also will put nutrients back into the soil. And so you actually get a healthier, more sustainable way to actually farm, which is pretty cool. There's also something called agroforestry. And for whatever reason, my slide that had these pictures up, it like got deleted. So agroforestry is when you plant, like have plants or crops within trees in the forest, which is cool. So you like have trees and then you have actual crops and then you have trees and crops and trees and crops, which is cool. And then contour plowing. So this is, instead of like leveling a hill, you actually plant using the hill or using the natural like environment and using that to your advantage. You can also see things like plateaus or, I keep forgetting the name of like a really famous location that has these terraced like hills. What it's called. But anyway, they terrace these hills because it allows for water flow to go down and past. So it'll start up at the top and then it'll flow down. So you don't actually have to water as much, which is really cool. And then you have things like no-till agriculture. And so this is where you leave the remnants of the previous harvest actually on the ground. Why? Yeah, compost, right? It's hard. As I was like, why is that? Well, why is that beneficial? Why would you want a natural compost?
More nutrient, less waste.
Yeah, right. It's more nutrients because these are organic plants, right? Which means that they have the nutrients that those new plants need, right? And then you get decomposition, the nutrients go back into the soil and get used for new plants. Okay. Questions? No? So then, you have something called integrated pest management. And so instead of just using the pesticide treadmill, where you like use pesticides, trying to kill them all, doesn't kill them all, and then it keeps going and you get more and more resistance. This is creating a sustainable practice so that you can actually manage pests. So one is that you can actually plant pest-resistant crop varieties. So we are able to help plants become more resistant to pests or become more toxic to pests so that they're deterred from actually eating the leaves or fruit. The other thing is that you can actually create habitats for predators. So I know this sounds kind of odd, but what it ends up doing is it actually helps you manage those pests, right? Because predators are a huge management factor in their prey. And so if you actually help them have a safe environment where they can continue to eat what they need to, then you'll be good to go. The other thing is that there's a limited use of pesticides. So if you can see here in the top graph, that is showing you the number of pesticide applications before IPM, so integrated pest management, before training in this, and then after training. So the use of pesticides significantly dropped because they were doing these two things as well as this. And then if you can see there, right, the harvest was actually more after this training, which demonstrates that this is actually a really sustainable practice. Because you have more profit from the crops being harvested. So the other thing is organic agriculture. So there are two big categories of regulations. One is no synthetic pesticides or fertilizer, and then the other is that it is free range. So have you ever seen that USDA organic sticker? That's the company that is within the US that helps regulate whether or not something is organic. So they have a bunch of standards that they follow. They like audit companies, they make sure that everything is actually what they say it is. So that's where you get to see organic produce. So there's also a more sustainable way to farm or fish. So one, there's actually a fishery management quota, and this helps to keep fisheries in check and actually hold them responsible for their actions. And in aquaculture, so you can see those circles on the ocean. Those are part of fisheries and like farming fish. And so pros is that economy is sustained, there's more food, more often, and then, which is good, right? So that we can actually have the supply for the demand. And then cons is that wastewater has to go somewhere. So in that lower picture, those are actually like in a warehouse. So those pools are in a warehouse. That wastewater will get to a certain level where it's like too dirty to use again, and then you'll have to put it somewhere. So that is what people are trying to figure out, and like how to clean it and where to put it, and is it actually safe to put it somewhere, much like a nuclear waste. And then within that, you have something called CITES, and that is the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species of Wild Fauna and Flora. It's a really long title, that's why it's easier to say CITES. And this organization helps ensure the international trade of wild animals and plants does not threaten the survival of those organisms in the wild, of those species in the wild. So this is actually really important, right? Because we don't want to have more human-caused extinctions. So there are some that are happening right now. But if we can avoid it, then we should. So this is how you can reduce bycatch. So here you have a really big net, right? And then this, they call it the cod end. And so pretty much there's a couple different things that they change so that you can actually have fish that aren't supposed to be here. And so one is an escape cover. So this is just a piece of the net that has bigger squares as well as a way to like leave. So it's kind of like a window. The other thing is that there's a grid. And so this is specifically like spaced so that only a certain size of fish will be able to go through and get trapped. And then as well as a square mesh window that allows for smaller fish that probably haven't reproduced yet, or smaller fish that aren't supposed to be there, are able to leave and then therefore continue on with the population. And then you have drawstrings here, which allows you to release those fish if they aren't what you are targeting. All right, questions about anything? No? Okay. We will